Hey, Comics Cubers, welcome back. Today we've got a treat for you. Mark Waid joins us again as we talk about Superman, The Last Days of Lex Luthor with Bryan Hitch, and World's Finest Teen Titans with Dan Mora. Come join us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with Mark Waid. How are you?
Good, good, good. What kind of day has it been so far?
Well, I just woke up, but
What day was it yesterday? How about that?
it's pretty good. It was pretty good. I mean, it's not going to be as good as this specific interview. I think the last time I
Okay.
interviewed you, Bleeding Cool featured us.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, let's see what I can get, what trouble I can get into this time.
You are currently writing Superman: The Last Days of Lex Luthor. It is
Hmm.
excellent.
Thank
In
you.
which Superman finds out that Lex Luthor is dying, and so he's trying to save him.
Right.
By the time I release this interview, issue number 2 will be on sale in a few weeks. What was the impetus for this idea, the inspiration? What was in your proposal?
First off, don't be too optimistic about when that thing's going to come out. So, um, it's running a little late, but we're going to get it out as fast as we can. So, that's all the question I heard. What was the rest of the question?
What was the impetus for the idea, and what went into your proposal for it?
I was approached ridiculously long, like 5 years ago, by a young editor who's not at DC anymore, but she wanted me to pitch a Black Label book, and I said, "There's no point because it'll never get approved." And no, it'll no, we can try to get it. No, you can't. Well, you must have a Superman idea, and you somewhat. No, I don't. Why not? Because I know it will never be approved. I was like, I just assumed my time at DC was gone forever. Um, and sure enough, I came home and I'm like, God damn it, I have an idea. And it was the only idea I could think of that I'd never seen before in DC Comics, which is the idea that Lex has a terminal disease and he goes to Superman to look for help because he knows that even though Superman is his arch enemy, Superman can't turn anybody away. He's never going to look anybody in the eye and go, "Sorry, you got to die." So that puts Superman in an incredibly terrible moral position, but he doesn't ruminate over it. That's not what Superman does. He's just, he bites his lip and he's like, "All right, if I do this, you are going to pay for all of your crimes, and when
Mm.
all this is said and done, but I can't let you die." And then there's an undercurrent for people who read Superman Birthright will kind of automatically get it. That there's an undercurrent that we see in that first issue that is a lot more about Lex and Clark as kids and specifically why Superman is so beyond just being Superman, why he is invested in keeping Lex alive because he thinks there's a debt to be paid.
Of course.
Yeah,
Speaking of that, you know, Superman being responsible for Lex going bald is an old Silver Age trope,
yeah,
and that's
yeah,
always, when I was a kid and I read it, I just thought it was funny to me especially because of the way it was drawn. You made me go bald, now I'll hate you
yeah,
forever.
yeah.
You upended it with just this one issue. What is the key to that? Do you prefer them being childhood friends?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think I, Elliot Magan is the guy who made that work for me with his two Superman novels. We've discussed this before. You've read these novels, yes?
Yes, Miracle
Yeah,
Monday
yeah. Miracle Monday and Last Son of Krypton,
and The
where
Last Hand of Krypton. Yeah,
right where Elliot does a real deep dive into what they would have been like as childhood, what Clark and Lex would have been like as childhood friends, and what he hit upon that I've really tried to carry forth in my work is that it's interesting to have them as childhood friends because of how different they ended up being and sort of a nature versus nurture, in process. Clark's big problem growing up was that he had all these powers. He was just more capable of seeing things, hearing things, knowing things, finding things than anybody else in the world. Like there was no one else like him that could understand what it felt like to do this or understand what it felt like to do that. Uh, he could see colors in the spectrum that we can't see, and he's tried to explain this to Ma and Pa Kent, and they're nice people and they're good smart people, but they're not like, they just don't, they're not built to get that. Lex is the only person who is smart enough to be able to really understand the stuff that Clark would be talking about if he could. So like, they don't ever, Lex doesn't know that Clark is an alien. He doesn't know he has superpowers, but at least Clark is able to talk to somebody who is he feels like is on his level. And so when the accident happens, in the 60s, it was, shorthand. It was, again, these were stories for children.
Yes.
And everything was shorthand allegory. So yes, Superboy, created a lab accident that actually caused Luthor to lose his hair. But the part of the story that no one ever remembers, except for Elliot, no one ever remembers is that's not why he was mad. It wasn't that he lost his hair. It was that he worshiped Superboy so much that he spent all his time and energy creating in his lab to just be a peer. He wanted to be at the scientific version of Superman, and he had created life in his laboratory in a little tiny town, Smallville, with no resources. This kid had actually created the building blocks of a new form of life, and in doing so excited, accidentally knocked something over, started a fire, and Superboy, Clark, without looking, just blew out the fire with super breath without actually looking to see how bad an idea it is to blow things around in a chemical laboratory. And so, he lost his hair, but what snapped him was that, no, I did this thing. I created this life, and you took it away from me. You did this because you're jealous. You don't want anybody else as smart as you out there. And that became the root of their, again, talking about the Silver Age, talking about the 60s, that became the root of their rivalry. It became the root of their, of Lex's animosity. In Birthright, we updated it to it wasn't that he created life. It was that he had finally discovered that there is alien life out there. He came in a world where, Clark and Lex both grew up in a world where, there was no Martian Manhunter yet. There was no Superman yet. There was no, there were no alien presences on Earth. And so Lex really was desperate to find life out there somewhere, because he refused to believe that there was a God who would put him on a backwater planet like this where he doesn't belong. I think in the first issue of the Lex Luthor series that just came out, he says to Clark, you can't imagine what it's like to be stuck in a world where no one else is like you.
Of course.
And so it's, without giving anything away in the ensuing issues of Lex Luthor, Superboy, Clark makes a similar mistake. Clark makes a similar screw up, and it creates, it destroys everything Lex had tried to build, and it just makes Lex pick up his ball and go home. And so Clark wakes up the next day, and everything's gone. All evidence to the lab is gone. Luthor salted the earth, and he has no use for Smallville from then on. So there's a very long answer to your question, but that is, to me, I took some from Elliot and then added some of my own stuff on it. And I think that's an origin for Luthor that I really like.
For the longest time, of course, they weren't childhood friends. In fact, Lex was significantly older than him in the post-crisis canon. As somebody who was working in DC at the time and a huge Superman fan, what did you think of that particular change that John Byrne and Marv Wolfman made to the character?
I'm a lot kinder to it in retrospect. At the time, I was not happy because I was such a big fan of what, the Superman canon. Looking back, I understand why they did it. I understand why they made that change. You needed to do something to signal to old readers that, no, this is not your father's Superman. This is something brand new, and we've got a bunch of new ideas, and you should climb aboard. It does bother me that John gets credit for Lex Luthor when he shouldn't. That was Marv. And actually, there's evidence. I mean, Marv did the same exact thing with Vandal Savage a couple of years before, when he first came to DC Comics in the earlier '80s. With action, I mean, he made basically, Vandal Savage became what Lex Luthor became in the John Byrne reality, but all of that was Marv's, and I wish he got more credit for it.
You really go out of your way to make Lex the dominant villain in Superman stories. So he even has him show up, arguably Superman's actually most physically powerful villain.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to establish that Lex is, in fact, pound for pound, if nobody had any powers, if nobody had any God-given advantages, that he is his greatest enemy?
Oh, by far, by far. I mean, it's not about because look, when you get in a fight with Superman, you know you're going to lose. I mean, I don't care who you are. You know, you can only throw so many punches before Superman beats you down. So, Doomsday accepted. But I'm talking about like Brainiac, Luthor, Toyman, Parasite, all those guys. At the end of the day, physical is not the way to beat Superman. You beat Superman by cutting into his heart with a knife. And Lex is an expert at doing that.
I, I'm a little surprised because you said 5 years ago that you came up with this idea already, right? So I'm a
Yeah,
little surprised that you didn't tweak the idea to try to publish it under another banner, another imprint.
I don't think it would have worked. I don't think that. I mean, it relies. Well, actually, I mean, you'll get more of a sense of why with issues 2 and 3, where there become things about it that are just so endemic to the DC universe that there wasn't there wasn't really an opportunity. I mean, yeah, I could have done pastiche on this stuff, but I don't I don't really respect that as a writer. I mean, with Irredeemable, that's as close as I've come to doing pastiche, and even then, I work very hard to distance it from the Superman tropes as soon as I possibly could because it's just easy to write a Superman story that's dressed up as something else. Anybody can do that. That's like bad karaoke. It's really easy to do the adventures of superb mans at some other company. um, I just if I'm going to do work on that character, I want it to be on that character.
There is a lot of that. There's a lot of different companies doing their own takes on Superman, and I feel like with something like Irredeemable, you specifically did take, you took what has now become a cliche, which is evil Superman.
Right, right, but wasn't necessarily back in 2007. Right.
Yeah, and but you also, I think, treated it as with more care than
Thank you.
a lot of people who currently do evil Superman, because a lot of people just do it to be like, oh yeah, yeah, well, it would be great if Superman was bad.
It's the easiest thing in the world. I mean, and I'm not knocking any specific writers or creators or characters out there or properties, but like the easiest thing you can do is what if Superman were a jerk? Well, he'd be doing petty things with his superpowers all the time. Well, that's dull. I mean, anybody can write that. A child can write that. It's more interesting to me with Irredeemable. Like I said, I got away from the what if a guy with heat vision had a man on the world. I got away from that pretty quickly, and it became a lot more about why someone would do this, why someone with that power would turn. And it's not just as simple as one moment in his life. It's a lot. I got to dig into what that life would be like growing up if you had those kind of powers, and what that would do to the people around you. So that was what Irredeemable was about. I, am I making sense? Like it's just the easiest thing in the world to go, oh, let's just put a different costume on him and make him an asshole. Well, that's anybody can write that.
I, I am not a writer, but I feel like I've seen a lot of it
Yeah,
to the point that it proves you right.
yeah.
Of course, you are writing a different version of Superman in Superman World's Finest, and I was wondering what the approach is right now, like in terms of connecting those. Do you even kind of see them as the same Superman at this point, or is just two completely different takes?
Two completely different things. Yeah, as you'll see as we get into issue 2, sort of more deviating from the Superman mythos as we know it, and more into, like I said, this is more of a spiritual successor to Birthright
Yeah.
than anything else. So
If Superman did not feel guilty about this particular incident with Lex Luthor back in, back when they were children,
yeah,
would he still go out of his way to save Lex Luthor?
he would, but he probably wouldn't spend as much energy on it, as to the detriment of because that's some of what issue 2 deals with is, all right, this is awesome that you're doing this for another human being, but you're spending so much energy and time on this that there's other stuff going on in the world that normally you would be taken care of, that you've delegated to the Justice League or whoever, and they're not happy with the fact that some of them are really not happy with the decision that you're making. So that's a lot of what we get into in issue 2.
So the Justice League, we can expect them to show up.
We can expect a couple to show up. I didn't want to do a whole giant bunch of Justice Leaguers because then it becomes less of a Superman story and less of an evergreen standalone thing. But yeah,
I noticed that since coming back to DC, and really with the exception of Birthright, I think you haven't really written Lois Lane.
That's true. Yeah.
I know that you've been on record as preferring the Superman Clark Lois love triangle, and obviously at this point that ship has sailed. They've been married for decades.
Right.
What is your reason for thus far not including
Mm-hmm.
Lois Lane, and can we expect that to change within the series?
Oh yeah, well certainly. I want to write Lois, and actually there will be more Lois coming up, but it's just there was no room for her in the Lex Luthor story, just because Jimmy and Perry aren't there either, really, except for fleeting moments. So, and then in World's Finest, I keep wanting to put the Superman cast in, I really do, but there's just so many things going on when you've got Superman, Batman, and Robin in a story that, and superhero guest stars galore, that I have yet to work in more Lois. But I like her as a character. And I think she and Superman are great together. And I think the love triangle between two people is an integral part of the Superman mythos. I prefer it that way, but I understand why people like married Superman. And I wouldn't, if you gave me the power to change that tomorrow, I don't think I would change it, because it's so ingrained into so many people after almost 30 years.
Yeah.
So it would be jerky to try to take that away from people. More people, most people who are reading Superman comics now know him as, he was always married to Lois Lane, so why would I change that? But I do like working in previous continuity, like in backstory continuity, like World's Finest, where it's set in a time before all of the identity reveals and a lot of the stuff that's been going on in the books in the last few years, so that I can have a free reign to do more of the classic versions. There's the thing about married Superman that bothers me, and I understand, although there are a lot of good reasons for Lois and Superman to be married. I've been saying that the thing that bothers me that I don't ever see addressed, and especially now that he's got a kid, is that Superman is all about putting everyone else's needs above his, right? But on an equal basis. He has to be impartial to that degree to everybody. So he has to give to the entire world, and he's got to be there ready for anyone. And the moment you become a married man, and certainly the moment you have a child, you have a whole new set of responsibilities.
I was actually going to ask if you think Jonathan was the point of no return, especially when they aged him up.
Absolutely the point. And again, I'm not saying he's a bad character. He's a good character. I'm not saying they shouldn't have done him. I wish Bendis hadn't grown into adulthood. But that is the point of no return. Superman has to be a family man first and a superhero second now. Mm-hmm. The moment he is married and has a kid. And that doesn't feel like Superman to me. So anyway, okay. There you go. All right.
I do feel like whatever I do keep of that particular conversation over there, a lot of people will watch that and try to pick it apart because you did write Spider-Man and Brand New Day.
Oh yeah, of course.
What makes that different?
It's Superman. It's Peter's always had a family. That's part of it too, is that the closest Clark had to a family was Ma and Pa Kent, and there's a difference between having elderly parents in another town, which again I don't love either. I think Superman works best when he doesn't have any family to fall back on, because it's a sad thing. It's people, nothing bad can happen to Superman. People say, well, then make bad things happen to him. He loses his parents, he loses his world. These are tragedies, and the more tragedy you have on a character like that, the better the hero is going to be, and the less invulnerable he's going to seem. Right. So, put me down in the column of I wish Mom and Pa were dead. Uh, but again, like I said, I'm not knocking anybody who likes that. I'm not. If that's your Superman, that is awesome, and I wouldn't change it today if I could, because again, it's it's so ingrained in what people know as Superman now. But so Clark, in my mind, Clark has never had it. The Superman that I've built in my head over the years, Superman's never really had a family. Peter had a family. Peter had, Peter had a very Peter was Peter first and Spider-Man second. And I guess in my mind, Superman is Superman first and Clark second.
I get that. What makes Lex Luthor tick?
He he genuinely hates knowing that he's not the regarded as the greatest man in the world. That's a big part of it. Superman came along, and from his point of view, this alien, this creature, this thing from another world, stole what was rightfully his, which was the adoration and admiration of every human being on the planet. That's a big part of what makes Lex tick. The other part of it is the stuff we talked about, where he he genuinely believes that what happened to him in Smallville was, and what scarred him in Smallville was just a sign from the universe that the earth hates you, that the world, that the fate and the world and destiny all hate you. And you've got to bounce back and be strong from that. And Lex is not a strong person. Lex is an emotionally screwed up, you know, difficult problem child. And he grew up to be a problem adult because he can never deal with his emotional instability. He was, really emotionally bankrupt as a kid. Not that he didn't have emotions, but he didn't know how to deal with them. And he had no real parent figures to help him figure this out. He's a really troubled kid. And in another world, when he doesn't create, giant killer robots, he's somebody you should really feel sorry for, because, it's not your fault that you were born emotionally unstable. This is a mental condition. So anyway.
So are you saying he, in the modern world, if he were created today, he probably would, we would probably say he does have a mental condition?
Maybe, I'm not sure. But in my mind, he definitely has. It doesn't excuse him. It doesn't excuse his crimes, and it does not explain him completely. But I do think I think that's the building block of everything, is that he just was not right as a kid.
Yeah. If Superman didn't exist, would Lex Luthor find someone else to take out his anger on?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Because like most villains, Lex is the author of his own defeat. He's his own worst enemy, really. That's the God's honest truth. And his ego is always going to get in his way. So yes, if it wasn't Superman, there would be Wonder Woman. If it wasn't Wonder Woman, it would be Bill Gates. If it wasn't Bill Gates, it would be Elon Musk. There'd be someone out there that Luthor would be grinding an axe about. Yes.
Besides his obvious amazing draftsmanship, what does Bryan Hitch bring to the table?
A lot more than is obvious at first glance. He is really helping tell the story in a deeper way than most of the time I hand a script over. I certainly work with my artists to make sure that they're feel like they're an equal part of the storytelling process. But with Bryan, he certainly got my blessing and permission to, move things around a little bit, expand certain scenes, contract certain scenes if he thinks they're not as visually interesting as they ought to be, add things here and there. And then I will go back and dialogue and, and talk and Bryan and fix stuff and make adjustments. And I don't mind doing that, because what Bryan brings to the table is always a net positive.
I love the way he draws facial expressions. Like, I
Yeah.
think a lot of people have made a big deal about the way Bryan does costumes, because he's the one who changed it and made it look real. But I think he does these really great subtle facial expressions. That look on Luthor's face when Superman first rips open the robot and he sees him and he's like, "Hi, you got a minute?"
Yeah. Ben, he's so good at that. The story is so much emotion, and there's so much internal, expression to it that he really pulls it off in a way that a lot of other artists couldn't do.
Did you request Bryan on this book?
Yeah, yeah.
And did you request Kevin Nolan inking him?
No, but that was a happy accident. I mean, I had. It's not so much that I requested Bryan. It was that when I pitched it and the previous publishing regime said no, Bryan had heard about it and Bryan asked me about it, and I know, of course, I'm Bryan forever. So I sent Bryan my pitch, and he said, I really, really want to draw that. So he made a run at it and was also shut down. So, the project was then approved the day that that there was a regime change at DC. But Kevin was not part of the discussion early on, but I love it. I mean, again, you can't ask for somebody that good on Hitch. Normally, I think we're very lucky to have him.
I also think that Bryan's art is on the next level because of Kevin. Kevin's so great.
Yeah.
I
agree.
I cannot understand running a business to the point where you say Mark Waid can't write for DC Comics, but
I can't understand. I don't understand running a business where you say a lot of people can't work at DC Comics that probably ought to be working at DC Comics. It wasn't just me, but it doesn't matter. Water under the bridge. It's all taken care of.
Yeah. Speaking of artists, wait, before we get there, what is in store, without any spoilers, for the next 2 issues of The Last Days of Lex Luthor?
I've talked about some of it already. With it, you said that certain heroes show up. The Legion of Superheroes shows up. It is the Adult Legion, and it is the pre-Bendis Legion, not because of any diss on what Bendis did with the Legion, but because we started this thing before Bendis did the Legion. So it's already a work in process. So
is it your Legion?
Yeah, well, it's not. It's kind of. A lot of it is. Here are the characters I want, and Bryan, feel free to draw whoever else you want to draw. So some of it's going to be a big surprise to me. I have no idea who he's going to put in the book.
Oh, great. Because I was going to ask you, knowing you, it's either going to be the adult Silver Age Legion or your 2000s Legion.
It's yeah. It is probably more likely the Silver Age Adult Legion. So they're showing up. We go to Atlantis. We go to a couple of other familiar Superman mythos places. I mean, that was a big part of the pitch too, and that was a big part of the appeal of the whole thing to me. Is this is a chance for me to take you on a guided tour through the entire Superman mythos and all of the touchstones, Atlantis, Kandor, the Legion of Superheroes, all of that stuff, and be able to give you a perspective on these specific elements that maybe you had not considered before, like that whole thing about why Superman doesn't spend more time in Kandor, which is a question I had, and then I had to go solve the problem, which is, okay, why doesn't he spend more time in Kandor? It's because, as I said in the book, it's because they worship him there. I mean, he saved their city from Brain. He's likened to a god to them. And so he can't be just another Kryptonian in there. He would love to be able to just go into Kandor and assimilate just spend time there from time to time and learn more about his culture and be more of his people and sort of assimilate more, just to be a more rounded human being and to satisfy a lot of his curiosity about what Krypton was really like. But he's othered the moment he sets foot. So,
yeah, I love the way that you're addressing these situations and looking at them from a different angle without actually, because I think a lot of other writers would probably just try to make it really depressing. And
yeah, just please come on, that's so easy. Again, that's low hanging fruit.
Yeah. Speaking of artists, we're talking about Bryan. Let's talk about Emma Lupachino.
Oh, she's so good. Yeah.
What's it like working with Emma?
Yeah, she's so enthusiastic. She is so upbeat. She is such a professional, and every page is just getting better and better every page is better than the previous page, and they're all beautiful. She doesn't complain about the fact that by the nature of a team book, there are many, many panels where there is more than one person in them. And I'm trying to do my level best to keep that from happening. But there's 5 Titans, there are 6 Titans. There's very, and it's about it's about their relationship. So she's great about that. She just did she's finished the third issue, which is called Titans Con. And that is where the Titans actually go to a San Diego Comic-Con style convention that revolves just around them. And it's fun that turns dark pretty quickly, but the fun she had in drawing, I wouldn't normally ask people to draw, hey, here's a convention crowd.
Mm-hmm.
That's a cool thing to do. Yeah, but she was in, she was, and she put in her own gags and her own back matter, sort of, background gags and stuff. And it was great. She's phenomenal. I want to work with her for the rest of my life.
It wouldn't be a Titans book without a massive crowd shot.
Exactly.
This is, of course, we're talking about World's Finest, the Teen Titans, and it's under the World's Finest banner. So is World's Finest just now its own banner to say that these specific books are interconnected?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, this is, a little corner of the DC universe I've been able to carve out for myself. And DC's been very generous about letting me carve out for myself. And hopefully there'll be more World's Finest books. I mean, we don't have any specific plans for any specific one yet, but World's Finest Teen Titans, if you outside of the Night Terrors books, World's Finest Teen Titans was the best-selling DC comic last month. So there's an audience. So, what do we want to do next? Do we want to do World's Finest Justice League? Do we want to do World's Finest, Kate Carson? I don't know. I mean, there's whatever, but that would be cool to be able to sort of expand that to like its own little sub imprint.
People missed you on DC, Mark.
I missed me too, believe me, and it's so much fun to be back.
What can we expect aside from Titans Con moving forward for World's Finest Teen Titans?
Let's see, you got Titans Con issue 2 comes out in a couple of weeks, or next week, I think, and actually or whatever, depending upon when you're listening to this. But that is a slightly smaller story about the Titans helping a young girl, a young telepathic girl in a small town, and the havoc that's happening there. Because these don't need to be world-beating stories. They don't need to be the Titans versus Darkseid. I need it to be smaller scale stuff, smaller stakes, because it's really not about who they're punching. To me, the most interesting part is how they interact. And in fact, most of issue 4 is just Wally and Roy and Aqualad hanging out at Wally's house for the weekend. No costumes, just how they interplay with each other, and being able to see how they are around each other tells you a lot more about each of their individual characters. And that's the fun part to me.
Of course, that means you're writing Wally West again. Is there any difference in the way you're approaching Wally now as opposed to the way you approach? Of course, now he's a kid.
Right. A little more. I mean, I think that I'm setting him up to be a little more starstruck than he grew up into, but he is, by my estimation, he's probably like a year or maybe 2 younger than whoever's the oldest Titan. So he's like the kid brother of the group. And so he's very excited all the time. And he is always looking for other people's, approval or whatever. Well, I mean, not in a beggy sort of pathetic way, but just he's always, he's like a puppy dog. He's always just eager to, have somebody say, hey, you did good. And Robin particularly, he looks up to Robin like nobody's business. And if you contrast that with their adult relationship, where they're very much peers and very much best friends, then we get to play with what is that transformation, what takes it from that, hero worship thing to how do we become best buddies and peers.
To where Dick Grayson is Wally West's best man at his wedding.
Exactly.
I was born in 1982, and despite George Perez being my favorite artist ever, I don't think I quite have ever really grasped the impact that the Titans had, the new Teen Titans had on an emotional level. And with the influx of Teen Titans stuff right now with Tom Taylor and Nicola Scott's series and your series with Emma, what makes the Titans so special?
It was Marv and George were way ahead of their time. I mean, I was what 17 when the first Titans book came out, and when that first George Perez Marv Wolfman issue came out, and was blown away because it was unlike anything DC was publishing, with an energy that was unreal, with character voices that were different, that characters that were a little more unique and individualized than, say, the Justice League, where they all sort of talk the same. And it's the interpersonal stuff that made it work. Marv and George don't get enough credit for issue 8, which was a day in the life, which was just character bits strung together. And no, I'm here to tell you, somebody who'd been reading comics at that point, no one had ever done that before. It was unthinkable that, from a comics editor standpoint, that you would allow your characters to just hang out in civilian clothes for 4 pages without punching anything. And it broke all of those conventional rules and did it so well that not only did that then become like a gateway drug for a lot of Marvel readers who've come over, or a bunch of non-comics readers who see characters there that are more fleshed out and more deep than your standard DC characters. But it gave permission for other writers, next generation, the generation after that, to be able to have that sort of flexibility. So, every time you see a sort of a day in the life kind of story, you got to tip your hat to Marv.
It's amazing. Yeah. I think one of the reasons that where the impact was lost on me growing up is because I'd always known about Terra, right? So
that's true. You weren't there for the big bombshell moments, or you weren't there for, who was Donna Troy. You weren't there for, like the real watershed moments in that first 50 issues or so.
Yeah, so I read that, I know Terra's going to be a traitor, and
right.
I feel like it's a different experience.
Totally got to be a totally different experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And what can we expect from Shazam as we go on with you and Dan Mora series? And I'm loving the dinosaurs.
No, thanks. I mean, it's just, my editor, Paul Kaminsky, loves dinosaurs. I have no idea why he loves dinosaurs so much, but if it makes him happy, the dinosaurs in the book will make it work. So, and Dan loves drawing this stuff, and Dan's just on fire. I mean, everything he does is amazing. But with Shazam, he's just having he's enjoying the fun, the sense of whimsy. So issue 2 just came. Issue 2 just come out. Issue 3 will be out soon. That is the issue where the captain goes to Gorilla City and gets conned by a bunch of gorillas into attacking the moon, where Gargowax, the Emperor of the Moon, or as the captain says, why would anyone want to be the Emperor of the Moon, is there with his own plan against the Earth. And so now the captain is caught in a giant war between gorillas who come to the moon in spacesuits and Gargowax and his killer robots, and it's just fun. It's just so much fun to write that stuff. It's just as crazy as it can be.
How this is one of those where do you get that particular idea questions?
I always look, here's the honest question, the honest answer is I always look for who is this character never fought before? Mm-hmm. Which of these characters have never met before? And that's the well I like to go to. So with the captain, yes, I could do a million Mr. Mind and Savannah stories, but why don't we table those for a little while and spend some time in the rest of the DC universe? So Gorilla City seems like the perfect place for a guy who already has a tiger living with him and making breakfast for him. So there was that. And then I like Gargowax. I like the Doom Patrol villains. So the honest answer to that question is that with the way solicitations work, the way that we have to give information to the distributors so far in advance about what the books are going to be. Like, right, we've already told the distributors, here's the cover and here's a plot synopsis for issue 5. Well, I don't know what issue 5 is yet. I didn't know what issue 3 was yet when I wrote it. So it's my least favorite time of the month. I get the email from my editor saying, okay, we need to solicit a copy. Jesus, I don't know. I'm not there yet. So this was honestly a knee-jerk, okay, let's do Gorilla City versus the Moon Emperor.
Oh, wow. And now you got to commit to it.
And now I got to commit to it. Yes, exactly. So that is, a lot more decisions are made in comic storytelling than most people realize by that process.
As a writer working on, let's say, these three books, you're going
Right.
from the tone of Lex Luthor to something like Shazam, which is really whimsical and kind of silly, and then Teen Titans, which is somewhere in the middle. How does your mind keep it straight? How do you keep the tone straight? Do you do anything? Do you have to take a break in between? What's the process?
Not really. What I have to do is the big thing is not tone. The big shift is not tone. The big thing that I keep having to remember is that the stakes are bigger, and the stakes are more dangerous in a book like the Lex Luthor book than they are in a Shazam book. But they still have to be interesting stakes. They still have to be menacing enough where there really is a sense of threat, but at the same time, you don't want to make it so dark and onerous. You don't want the Joker in a Shazam book. You just don't. That's a bridge too far. So that's really it. It's not so much the tone as it is picking the level of threat. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that. And what is the mental adjustment made for working with different artists and making them, getting them to give the best of themselves?
it's it is it's a later part of the process. I mean, I concentrate on the story first, and then once I have a script in hand, then I can go back over it and go, okay, well, you know what? This person's better at this. This person's not. This person doesn't like doing this as much. So I sort of make those adjustments as I go. But there are not many to it. I mean, my scripts are pretty much the same for most artists, with the understanding that they can go their own way with them as long as we're telling the same story.
Disregarding these three artists, you once told me in an interview that Gene Ha was one of the five top artists you've ever worked with, which
Yep.
spurred a lot of questions, which I'm
Yeah.
sure you can guess. Who are the other four? And you don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
I couldn't even take, because it depends on any given day. But Gene is always going to be in my top five. I mean, there's such energy there. There is such character work there. The drawing is impeccable, and he's a great storyteller in and of his own right, which is a very important part of the process. Like it's great to work with an amazing artist, but it's even better to work with an amazing artist who knows what a story is,
Mm-hmm.
and is capable of doing, and is capable of that level of thinking.
Can I tell
So
you the name Gene mentioned that he said was like, oh, but Mark has worked with this guy.
yeah,
It's Mike Waringo.
Mike, absolutely part of that five. Yeah, I mean, you don't get any better than Mike. I just don't. I mean, I've worked with people as talented as Mike, but I've never worked with anybody more talented than Mike was. And he, just the way he could look in my brain, it was amazing. Like with most artists, you write scene descriptions and then you kind of see what they do with them, and sometimes they look like what you pictured and sometimes they don't, but that's okay as long as they look like what they're going to look like. With Mike, it was like he could see in my head. Like everything I wrote, when he drew it, it was exactly the way I pictured it in my head, because we were just so in sync.
That's
And it was
amazing.
just so joyful to work with him.
Yeah, and you worked with two different iterations of Mike Waringo.
Yeah, did the Flash stuff, and then we did the Fantastic Four.
And his like, as a fan, I would say like he was already great and then he got greater.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He just, watching him mature over those first couple of issues of Flash. I mean, the first issue of Flash he did was okay, and the second one was okay and better, but not amazing. But I remember distinctly picking up that third issue and going, okay, now he's got it.
Mm-hmm. My last question for you is I've decided to ask this question to everyone who was there at the time at this point,
Sure.
because I'd like to compile them at some point.
Mhm.
What did you think of the Filipino invasion of the 1970s?
I they're too they're well. First of all, I wasn't really as keyed into it, because as a fan, I was like 10, 11 years old, and I wasn't reading the mystery books. House of
Mhm.
Secrets, Unexpected, World, Witching Hour, House of Mystery. I wasn't reading those because when I was 8, one of them gave me a nightmare, and my parents forbid me from reading these horror comics anymore. So I didn't really get a sense of those artists until much later. I remember at the time when I did see their work, I didn't like it at the time. I was a child. Remember, Kurt Swan was my baseline, right?
Oh, so many lines.
Right. And so
Yeah.
exactly, so complete, so many lines, and so it's not, they're so complicated. There's so much business going on. Now I get it. Now I look back on Nestor Redondo. Now I look back on Alfredo Alcala. Now I look back on that school and go, oh my God, these guys were phenomenal. They just DC used them well as mystery artists. They didn't use them well whenever they tried to cram them into superhero stuff. I don't think that was their place. Their best. They're going to, Alex Nino's not going to do his best work
No.
on Superman. Julie Schwartz made him ink a 8-page Superman story in the in the early '80s, late in Julie's run, and it was not good. And it's because again, it's like you're taking your lead guitarist and making him play bass on your song
Yeah.
when he's not a bassist.
I can understand that. Yeah, I feel like I feel also that the general sentiment, even here back then, was like they were great draftsmen, but the pop that you need for superhero stuff wasn't particularly there.
Just wasn't really there. Yeah, this is we were a world used to Kirby and Infantino, and this did not look like any of that stuff.
Thank you so much, Mark
Of
Waid.
course, anytime, sir.